Hello and welcome to the Ecometrics podcast. I'm Matt Andrew, General Manager and Partner at Ecometrics, and today I'm really happy to be joined by Tom Mills, Global Head of Media Investment at Haleon, and Michelle Hobbs, Global Media Lead for Publicis Le One, Haleon's media agency. So previously we chatted with John O'Connor, Haleon's Marketing Effectiveness Analytics Director, about what was involved in building the scale of Haleon's global effectiveness program, all while navigating some pretty big changes of going from a pharma world of GSK to a standalone consumer business. So today we're going to talk a bit more about how those marketing mix modeling insights have helped transform Haleon's media planning and approach to performance. So welcome, Tom and Michelle.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
So maybe, Tom, if we can come to you first, just to help set some of the context around how you go about setting Haleon's global media strategy, and in particular, what's the role of the effectiveness program? How does it kind of come into that mix?
Great question. So our global media strategy is called Doing the Right Thing, and it's based on a famous quote by Peter Drucker, which is, efficiency is doing things right and effectiveness is doing the right thing. I always get it the wrong way around, which kind of loses some of the impetus. But it's about trying to ensure that we are focusing on quality media and ensuring that we are not trying to chase the cheapest CPM. And I think you mentioned the conversation you had with John about the changes and the separation in 2021 when we were GSK. There was a big focus on buying the cheapest media impressions. We were working on a piece of work with Publicis, trying to understand what we were buying, where we were buying, and there was a real focus on trying to get that price cheaper. But actually, when you start looking at that, you actually identify that the quality of the media you're buying actually is not great. And you're looking at some of the metrics. They were quite rudimentary metrics back then, viewability. And what we were identifying was actually, yes, we were buying cheap media impressions, but actually the viewability, and that was really our only sort of metric of quality at that point, was very low. So we were starting to get a thought around actually there may not be a strong correlation between cheap and outcomes. My wife always says, if you buy cheap, you buy twice, and that normally applies to washing machines, but actually it's the same for media as well. And the step change came in the latter part of that year when Simon Peel joined us from Adidas, and he came in with a vision around effectiveness, and the strategy, Doing the Right Thing, was his brainchild, and it really was a pivot, a change in perspective from trying to chase cheaper impressions, which had been the currency for big CPGs. And I worked agency side for a long time, and that was a big part of our work from an auditing perspective, was how do we get as much value, and value was cheaper. But actually the work that Simon brought with him, and then the vision was actually value can be derived from something that's more expensive, and the strategy that was embedded really focused on trying to drive that balance between short-term and long-term investment. When you're going after cheap media, you can drive some short-term gains, but actually that long-term brand building is probably an area that isn't getting a huge amount of focus. Equally, trying to ensure that we were deriving value from buying greater quality, and there was a program which we'll probably talk about later called Project Unicorn, which is a transformation project really, which has pivoted the way that we plan and buy media, but also how we attribute value to that. So actually working with our auditing firm MediaSense and with Publicis, it's trying to derive an acceptable cost for things that are more expensive, and then meaningful measurement, which is why we're here today, talking about the importance of the always-on MMM piece, and those elements have become synonymous when we talk about driving effectiveness, because the outcome is critical now. It's actually being able to talk about growth and talk about using media as a growth driver, rather than, unfortunately, media historically was a bank.
Yep.
Media was a place where you could cash out, and it was about trying to spend to plan, or trying to ensure that we could take money out of the media plan rather than using that to invest in growth. So doing the right thing is about trying to do the right thing by the brand, by the consumer, because that's a really important part of this, but equally ensured by the company as well, and using media as growth.
Yep. So it sounds like that kind of shift in mentality from media as a cost and minimizing that cost, in that how do you get the lowest CPMs, how do you get the lowest cost media that you can within whichever any channel you're using, into this idea of being able to measure media, see it as a growth, see where it drives growth in the business, and to then have those transformative projects like Unicorn, which we'll talk about a bit more, what that means and how it's come to life with Publicis as well, has kind of shifted that focus from just buying cheap to buying effectively, where even if that's the most expensive place to be, because you're seeing the return come from that.
Yeah, very much so. And I don't think we could have done that without the measurement piece. When we first started the program of trying to install quality into our buying approach, it was a fairly tricky conversation to have in some instances, and I know sort of Publicis were great partners on that, but we were trying to change 15-20 years of media buying approach, and actually saying we're going to spend more money and we might get less in terms of impressions or TV spots, but actually what we will see off the back of that will be a greater benefit to the business. We kind of knew that was going to be the case, but when you haven't got those proof points, there is a sort of follow us into the breach moment, which is we kind of think this is right. We're pretty confident it is, and I think sort of the work that Publicis has done, and also partnering with yourselves, we were pretty clear that it was the right way to go. But there's still, you still need the proof points from yourself to demonstrate that this is the right way to go.
Yeah. And so for you, Michelle, what did that look like in that transition from working with a partner that were focused on minimizing cost into that dimension of maximizing effectiveness overall?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was really game-changing for us, to be honest, because there's so many clients who are still very focused on efficiencies. So that move to effectiveness, or that pivot that we did a few years ago with the strategy that Tom just mentioned, was game-changing. Like he said, we just struggled initially with the proof points, because everybody wants to already know something's going to be successful. So to get people on board, it was absolutely critical to get that initial measurement in place. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we got that first result back, and we'd increased the quality, and it was actually in GB market, and we got that first result back. Then we were able to market that, moving forward. We were able to show different markets and different marketing directors then that we'd had some success, and it gave everybody the confidence then to invest more behind the program.
Oh, great. And so overall, just like, what's the landscape of how you plan, like how you go from the budget allocation globally down into kind of the way that you work across local markets, in terms of that brief to plan?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously the brief initially comes from the Haleon marketing teams. There's two stages really to the planning process. We do an initial budgeting phase earlier on, which is more of a broad brushstrokes, just kind of looking just roughly, if you want to achieve this kind of result, this is roughly the kind of money that we need. We submit that into the business, and that happens, quite far out. Then when it gets to the actual planning phase, that's where we'll get into much more detail around what kind of is the exact channel selection going to be. How many weeks on air do we think we need to achieve, the result? What is the mix of TV, ORV? Should we be down weighting some TV, putting digital on the plan? What's out of home, going to deliver? And all of these things to do with the channel mix. Mm-hmm. So there's two phases, I think, that this this has kind of really helped us out both in the initial budgeting phase, but then when we get to all that scenario planning where the planners are going back and forth creating lots of different plans and trying to figure out which is the one that's going to give us that best return on investment and be that the best result for the business.
Yeah, great. And in terms of one of the discussion points with John was around the kind of scenario forecasting, the optimization kind of capabilities that can support some of those decisions. So how is that adapted working relationships? Like, what's it mean in terms of the cycles between client side, agency side that you see in terms of coming to your plans and going through the year and optimizing as you go?
What it does is it really helps us to start modelling out and determining the right channel mix. Michelle touched on it, but some of the work we're trying to do is trying to diversify that media investment. When you use multiple touch points, there is a greater effectiveness off the back of that. And I think the tools that are available enable us to start modelling that part out. And I think it gives that element of confidence into moving money from traditional tried and tested mediums, and equally ensuring that we are driving that incrementality across the media plan. So I think it's these tools are becoming ever important in the way that we want to sort of strategically drive our media investment.
And for you, Michelle, in terms of what your team finds useful and where the insights come into the planning decisions, how are they being used? And especially when it comes to actually adopting some of those, what have the challenges been? Because I know it's lots of different types of decision that feed into the eventual media plan. You've got all the consumer landscape and how the media landscape is changing. You've got what's happened and effectiveness in the past. So how do you approach that?
Look, I think the tools are really important because for years we have been supplying media plans to clients and recommending media plans. Don't always have the science to back up that you do this is the potential result you're going to get. So a lot of the time is spent as a media planner justifying the plan you have in front of you. And when you get to in a conversation with a senior marketing director who is questioning, why are we spending this much on TV? Why didn't you put out of home on the plan, or you've got this much digital? If you don't have some of these effectiveness and science-based solutions backing you up, it's quite difficult to justify why you think this is the correct plan. So for me, embedding that into the media planning cycle has been really game-changing in being able to have that conversation with a level of confidence in front of really senior marketers over at Haleon. Now, of course, it's not a walk in the park always to set up something like this. If you've been working a certain way, for a number of years, it's like anything, bringing something new into the mix is sometimes a bit challenging. And I think I've got to say, that's been a long haul process. That wasn't an overnight success. We spent a lot of time getting our proof points correctly, starting out with a smaller number of markets, testing it out, training people up. And then, of course, the way our business works is that we've got the global team, and then the things really happen in, the BUs and markets. And there's only a small number of us globally as well. So it can't just be a handful of us understanding how to use the tools deeply and controlling everything from the centre. That's not going to work. So a vital part of it was training, education of the markets, of the planners, and we set out to create some effectiveness champions in the markets who it's like a train the trainer program. So we would train them up, and then they could then help to field the questions in the markets to be able to troubleshoot if needed, and then the markets could then succeed on their own. But I won't pretend it was like an overnight success. I think John mentioned it's taken us 3 years really to get where we have, but we feel in a really strong place now.
It's it is an incredibly successful approach that we've created now, but to Michelle's point, it's there's been challenges along the way, and I kind of alluded to it at the top of the questions, was that it is transformative. Like, we've had to run a transformation program, and I don't think we really appreciated until the end that actually that is what we were really leading. I think, you know, an element of naivety, we thought, well, actually we're just changing TV KPIs, but actually that is a seismic shift in terms of trying to embed new thinking, trying to change the mentality around the cost associated with it. And equally, when you've been talking about how much you get for a cost, if, you know, TV ratings for X amount of pounds or dollars, when that sort of language changes slightly to this will deliver X, I think that there is certainly going to be growing pains along the way.
Yeah.
And there were some of those, but we've got it to a great place now, incredibly proud of the work that sort of we've done globally, locally, across ourselves and with Publicis.
Yeah, and with that feeling of pride, what does that look like in terms of what's been created, that measurement ecosystem for Haleon, and what you see between both of you for Haleon as a client and as a brand, versus what exists elsewhere, what you've seen with other clients or in other roles that you've had?
So I asked John this question because he'd been at a conference recently, the ICOM Data Summit, and I said before we came on air, I said, you know, where do we sit? And he said, we're in really good company. We're sort of holding our own versus the big CPG companies and the big players in the industry. So I think that's a great point of reference, that actually we're in a really good spot. It's a key part of our media strategy, meaningful measurement. It's ensuring that we've got this rigorous approach to understanding the long-term piece, knowing that if you spend £1 today, then you'll see a return in maybe 12 months, but equally getting that measurement strategy in place for the short term. Understanding what that is, and equally ensuring that everybody is talking the same currency, but also updating those KPIs and that framework that focuses on actual business outcomes, rather than more arbitrary older metrics, which were brilliant when we were in the dawn of the digital age, for example, but actually now, how does that translate into what we're trying to do, and that's selling products.
Yeah. And Michelle, you mentioned earlier in the talk around some clients still focused very much on that cost basis. So for you, what does that look like? How are you able to work with Haleon versus working with some other clients?
Yeah, I think honestly this is a much more sophisticated engagement now. I think when John and I were sitting around a few years ago with a handful of MMMs and a bunch of marketing directors like screaming at us going, is my TV working? Should I be doing more digital? You know, like, and we didn't have the answers to these questions. So cut to now, we're in a completely different space. We are able to have these kinds of conversations with senior marketers, give them an idea how their investment, you know, like what it's delivering for them, and that really gives media and marketing more of a seat at the top table for me, and that's a very important thing, you know. So to Tom's earlier point, you know, we're seen as transformation business drivers and not just a cost driver anymore. I still think that a lot of clients are stuck in that efficiency world at the moment, and you know, like I say, this has not been a perfect journey, but the fact that we are in such a different place now versus some other clients I've worked with, there's still obviously things to do and room to improve, don't get me wrong, but we're in a really great spot. So good to hear that he's got some recent idea of how we're doing versus other clients.
Yeah, and I think the way that we have embedded the measurement approach into the media investment strategy of Unicorn, it's now seamless. When we first started, it was fairly peripheral, but I think that was mainly because we didn't have the learnings. But now Amar, who works for John, is a core member of our team, and I genuinely get excited when my team goes and he says, we've got another always on MMM coming, and maybe a window into my life, but it's a real point of joy to see it coming through, because broadly they're all positive, and it's just wonderful that we're able to offer out these proof points. Going, as Michelle said, when we had one and then we had a second one, the second one wasn't that great, and it was hold strong, and then bit of a lag, then they started to come through, and now the proof points are really impressive, and they continue to grow, and it's really exciting.
Yeah. So let's talk about them more. Like, where have those effectiveness metrics proved most impactful? Like, how has it enabled Project Unicorn to come to light? And maybe just talk about what it is in a bit more. Yeah. What's it enabled you to do?
Yeah, of course. So, Project Unicorn is it's an auditing approach, really. But the elements above that are strategic levers that focus on a set of KPIs which have been designed to focus on driving quality. It's about trying to buy better media. I mean, the one example I often use is it's going from 15 sort of Murder She Wrote. I love Murder She Wrote, but not 15 spots of those.
Your daytime TV
exactly,
crowd, yeah.
And consolidating that into a Champions League spot or into a House of Dragons spot. And that's the ethos. It's trying to use the money we've got, but use it better, reduce the wastage, and use those levers within the TV space or the digital space, pivoting to things like attention. But the auditing part of that is really about the value that we drive from it. Working with not a traditional pool of auditing, which is how it works, but actually having an acceptable cost. That is, we are prepared to pay X for House of Dragon, and then Publicis usually get it cheaper than that, and that's where we derive our value from that part. So it's really we have this sort of flywheel, sort of affinity loop, which is we're trying to do both. We are trying to drive value for the business, and we're delivering some great TV savings numbers, but equally we're then trying to drive that growth as well. But we're not using it as the cash out.
Yeah.
We're using it as that growth driver. And I think the part that is most exciting is that since we started our media effectiveness journey, of which Unicorn is a part of that, we've seen 6 consecutive quarters of media contribution growth, and it's at 12% media contribution to sales, which is phenomenal. Yeah. And it proves that point about using it to drive the outcome rather than trying to use it to take that money out.
Yeah, a brilliant point. Within that space of the effectiveness metrics, the program measurement as a whole, and how that syncs with all the other tools that you have available, where do you think there's still room for it to grow, to kind of continue that transformation and those spaces?
Well, there's always more room for more brands and markets to be part of the program, of course. I think we're at the point of around 70 to 80% being covered, though, having said that. So we're in a super strong place already with that. I think personally, from my point of view, still from an agency point of view, getting it just embedded in the fabric of media planning, and just making sure it is just part of what we always do. We talk about how we should be making our planning more intelligent, and always looking to ensure we're modernising and staying ahead. So I think for me, it's just making sure you're baking it in, constantly. And that's, like I said, is not a one and done job. It's not something, this for me is not something you just roll out and you do a nice PowerPoint presentation and give everybody a login to, to build their scenarios, and off you go. Like, it's actually a commitment, to the business, and we have to make sure that we are in that for the long haul, constantly, continuously training teams, again, not just a one-off. So I would like, I know it's not very exciting, but that for me is like what we need to do in the next year to just kind of bed this down and continue to ensure it builds on the credibility it's already got.
Yeah, and that's a critical part of building impact at scale.
Yeah.
Right? And for those that might not know, in terms of the overall size or scale that we're talking about, Haleon and Publicis Le One, and the teams, like how many people are we talking about across being involved in this kind of media planning collaboration? Even just rough numbers, we're talking hundreds of marketers, probably tens, hundreds of people across Publicis globally as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got roughly 800 people in the media team. I'm not saying that every single one of them is logging in
sure.
Doing scenarios in that way, but it's a sizable operation. Yeah, it's not just a couple of people, and hence, like I said earlier, the global team. Like, it's important that everybody knows their roles in this. The global team can't run around, 92 markets, doing the scenario planning for people. It's about making sure we also get people evangelizing about it in the markets. It's like absolutely key.
Yeah. And for the marketers across Haleon, in terms of how you're seeing the change in how they communicate about what they're doing, have you seen more global alignment, more kind of consistent communication, and the way that they're talking about media plans as well? What kind of softer benefits have you seen?
100%. I think Michelle said it perfectly earlier. It's brought media to the table a bit, in the sense of it's always been a really important part of the marketing approach, but it was always quite tactical and sort of the blunt end of the spear. But actually it's coming upstream a bit, and actually ensuring that some of those key principles are being embedded earlier on. I mean, I get a very warm, fuzzy feeling when I'm on a call or in a meeting and a brand manager or a marketeer who I don't know starts talking about the program, and it's wonderful to see how it's spread sort of by osmosis. And the DNA part that Michelle touched on is really the end state. You want it to become just memory muscle. You want that thought on driving quality and trying to improve that element is absolutely critical. But one of the parts, I think, when you talk about the wider sort of marketing community, there's a currency now to talk about, in the sense of you're no longer talking about click-through rates, or you're not talking about sort of arbitrary metrics. You're actually talking about effectiveness percentage increases, and that translates pretty well across a multitude of functions, because ultimately an increase in effectiveness is an increase in benefit for the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the key parts of this, is that really having that ability to talk cross-functionally across multiple different stakeholders in different markets about our journey, and talk about effectiveness in the percentage terms via our studies, really helps to have a commonality.
Okay, great. And so in this environment where you've raised the floor so far globally, hearing from ICOM and the kind of level of capability that Haleon have, talking about what you've seen from other clients, and how the type of conversations that you have from a planning perspective and an outcomes perspective, with that new floor, what's next for Haleon? Like, where are the places you're looking to explore and experiment and take that even further?
It's a really great question. I think there's always room for more, isn't there? And next, I think one of the parts is, how do we adapt our approach to the ever-adapting media landscape? Understanding some of the amazing opportunities that are coming through with AI. How does that tie into it? How do we ensure that AI-led media buying is focusing on those key areas that we want to drive? Because historically, programmatic algorithms were focused on price and CPM and auto bidding, etc. So I think there's a really lovely opportunity there about how that is interwoven. I think the other hot topic is retail media. It's a lovely buzzword, but it's something that we're actively working on, trying to understand how effectiveness fits into that space, which is maybe at that shorter end of the long and the short part, and equally how we continue to drive that element of diversification, which is really about ensuring that we are continuing to invest in other channels. Media is having to work harder, and we need to ensure that there are touch points that our consumers are actively engaging with. So I think that, for me, is one of the critical things of how we move forward with it.
Yeah. And I think that retail media is a big topic, and we're definitely not going to cover retail media as a whole now, but it starts to add a different dynamic of not just what's most effective, but also how that wraps into commercial decisions, with especially when you're selling products through retail partners as well, and there's that overlap between the two spaces. You have the interplay between a joint business plan, a JBP, and what's in your media budget. So that's a really difficult dynamic to start to unpick, and a really challenging conversation to have with a retailer if you don't have good effectiveness numbers on the table in front of you.
I completely agree, and there are some lovely commonalities though in regards to the sort of broad programmatic work, in terms of sort of some of the effectiveness pieces we put in around effectiveness. Ensuring that attention metrics are in place, ensuring that we are looking at inclusion lists, trying to reduce the long tail of sites, to ensure that we are focusing on those quality placements as much as we possibly can, but understanding that it's a different opportunity. So yes, there are similarities, but there's also quite stark differences as well. So it's going to be another great adventure.
Yeah. And for you, Michelle, in terms of that kind of broader media landscape and the changes that we see, there's creative as a whole, and we haven't really talked about that as much, but we know it's such a strong impact in terms of the overall outcome that a campaign can have. There's the media fragmentation that Tom mentioned, and that just getting quicker and quicker. There's the rise of kind of AI journeys for consumers instead of just a traditional search journey. So what are the changes that you think this kind of type of measurement and effectiveness program needs to make to keep pace with those type of things?
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, there's always something. That's the beauty of our industry, right? There's always something changing and happening, and like the challenges for us, as marketers and agency folk, to kind of keep the pace here. I think one of my slight worries moving forward, because all of the things you said is, I agree, is there's going to be an increased burden on us to be answering back to how all these elements are making a difference in the effectiveness, results that we're getting. I'm a little bit worried about what's that great quote around, not everything that can be measured should be measured, or something. I think it derives from some smart Einstein quote, doesn't it, actually?
It's something like, not everything that matters can be measured, or something like that.
Something like this. And I worry a little bit of the over engineering sometimes of these things in a industry like marketing, where we know that it's part science, sure, but it's part art as well. And with the fragmentation piece, there are so many channels out there now, experiential channels, like you just said, retail opportunities, and things that get quite difficult for us to actually be able to measure. And I worry a little bit about a world where we are obsessed with this to the point that we won't consider things unless we can see the ROI or the score of these things. I think that there has to be that consideration at some point, I think, and we have to apply a little bit of common sense, I think, to these things. But like you say, creative is a huge one for us moving forward. We haven't, we were in a very solid place with this program now from a media effectiveness point of view, and like Tom said, we've had great results over the last few years with our contribution to sales increasing. But what does the difference in various different creative campaigns make to that? Would be a evolution. Like, I could see that being a near-term evolution that would be a really good way to evolve the program.
Yeah. And I think what you said is really important, right, as well, in that these types of measurement programs and ecosystems should never be about saying no to things. It's more, how do you create a landscape where the foundation of what you're doing is secure enough that you can create the space to test and to go into those new spaces that you're not sure about, and do it knowing that the foundation of your business is there and you've got the growth plan in place and it's well captured and well planned. And then it gives that kind of bucket of space for we don't know what this is going to do, but let's test it and let's see what it looks like.
Exactly. I'd hate to lose that. You
Yeah.
know, I think that's super important that we retain that.
And I think it's it's very much a living model, it's a living approach. As consumer habits change, it has to change.
Yep.
We have to change. I mean, you very briefly mentioned search. I think I've talked more about search this year than I probably have for the last 15 years because of the way that the consumer habits are changing with the likes of ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini. Understanding that consumer journey now and how information is being gathered and how that's going to start impacting the way that that we need to approach those elements. So it has to continuously keep moving. It can't just stand still, and it's not done. It lives and it grows, and it has to evolve.
And so maybe to wrap us up, if you were going to offer some advice to others in your position, what are some of the things that have been most important to keep in mind when you're collaborating between media planning, between analytics, and when you're going through this type of overall transformation that you've been going through over the last 3 years?
Oh goodness, that's a great question. I would say that if we were to go on our journey again and we were to share a case study to others, it would be bring people on the journey a lot sooner. I think understanding the size of what you're trying to achieve early on, I think that's probably something that I would impart as wisdom, which is this is not a small process. This is something that will touch many different facets of your organisation, and I think that's probably something that if we had our time again, I'd probably have got into senior stakeholders in different parts of the business where it's more peripheral, but actually equally as important to demonstrate this is where we're moving, and equally to ensure that there is this continuous narrative of why we're doing it, and really trying to embed that. Because while I think we did a good job at the time, we probably could have done better in terms of that, constant reinforcement of why we're doing it. But it was certainly made easier once we had the always on MMMs coming through, because we had the proof points. So I would say to others is utilise partners like yourself, but equally look to see what is available externally to pull through some of those proof points. So I think that's probably what it is, because once we had one or two, it was much easier.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with what Tom said. I think the senior stakeholder, endorsement from the beginning was vital. So people like Tamara Rogers, CMO of Haleon, wanting to she really kind of inspired, the effectiveness program. And like Tom said, Simon Peel, the global head of media, was the one who also kind of really kicked things off in this way. So having those senior stakeholders supporting the program was really important, because it meant that when we needed to go to markets and tell them this is what we wanted to do, they're obviously more likely to listen, knowing that this program has got the backing of some really senior people in the organisation. So that's pivotal. We talked a little bit earlier about what I would call the marketing of the program that we did. Whilst I don't think we nailed that initially, I think we have a really good program going now. So whether it is monthly sharing in the form of newsletters to say, here's the latest results that are out. We do quarterly sharings. We bring teams together on a quarterly basis from across the business. And we have sessions where we will share out, the latest results. And then in top-to-top sessions, which are obviously less frequent than that, we have these fantastic assets now with these results. These can be part of our meetings. That we weren't holding a meeting a few years ago talking about the media contribution to sales increasing, across the business. That just wasn't, we didn't have that kind of data.
Yeah.
So I think we're able to market now and merchandise, at all these different levels of the business, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
And the last thing I would say, I think I've always mentioned this a little bit already, but be in it for the long haul. I remember 3 years ago that we set out and said it is a 3 to 5 year program to, you know, get this like fully kind of humming and running, and the commitment, you know, that people have to put behind that. You know, at the time it can seem quite daunting, but I really think it's been paying off in dividends in the last year.
Yeah, and you raised a really good point actually. When Haleon spun off in 2022, 3 years ago, it was really clear from tomorrow there were a couple of things to do, and marketing effectiveness was pretty much number one. So that really does help to give you that driving force and that air cover to start pushing forward. And then after sort of our spin, the following sort of internal marketing summits, which Simon and Michelle led, from a media perspective, was about effectiveness, and it continues to be about effectiveness, and that is a really helpful tool when you're trying to change something.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. And I guess what I hear from what you've said just now, but also the thread that kind of carries all the way through this conversation, is it's great, it's good to have a number, it's important to have a number, and it gives you like a foundation to work from. But actually the critical thing for both of you seems to have been that ability to communicate, to share, and just to keep at it, and to keep it growing, and to bring people in with those proof points and show them that it's moving, and kind of set that snowball rolling down the hill to just get bigger and bigger, and pick people up as it goes along as well. So that kind of community side, bringing that to life, is, if not as important, more than important, of just the measurement and the numbers itself that sit behind things. So great advice. Thank you to both of you for sharing the journey that you've been on over the last few years, and what it's allowed you to do as organisations and partners with each other now as well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for tuning in. If you're new to the Ecometrics podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to hear more from our clients, from partners, from industry experts, then please do follow with wherever you get your podcasts, or on our YouTube channel. For more insights, for papers, for some articles in different topics, then you can also go to ecometrics.com to hear more. So thanks again, and looking forward to seeing you soon.